Welcome to the Project Censored Show on Pacifica Radio. I'm your host, Mickey Huff, with Eleanor Goldfield, and today we are honored to bring you a special presentation. It's been 55 years since the Kent State Massacre at Kent State University in Kent, Ohio, the terrible shootings of May 4, 1970. This program honors the May 4, 2025 date. We are going to talk about a history of the Kent State Truth Tribunal. We'll get some updates on some very important work that's been going on for years, but also culminating in some new public presentations of this material. I'd like to first announce our amazing guests that we have today, starting first, no stranger to the Project Censored audience, Laurel Krause, co-founder of the Truth Tribunal and director of the Allison Center for Peace. Laurel's an advocate for Kent State truth and for the protection of protesters in America today, also dedicated to safe renewable energy and combating the climate crisis. Since 2007, Laurel has written on these topics at her blog at Mendo Coast Current and makes her home at the Allison Center for Peace in the Mendocino Coast, California, creating People's Memorial Park and Power Art Farm. On the 54th anniversary last year, Laurel's piece on the Mendocino Coast started at Substack before spearheading the Kent State Truth Tribunal for her sister Allison Krause, who was killed at Kent in 1970. Laurel worked in sales and marketing and technology startups in the early days of Silicon Valley and the internet. Laurel Krause, you've also written with me at Project Censored, and we've covered issues around Kent for many, many years. Having done my graduate work on the Kent State shootings. Welcome back to the Project Censored Show. It's good to see you again.
Thanks for having me, Mickey.
Emily Kunstler is also with us, co-founder and video archivist of the Kent State Truth Tribunal. Emily co-runs Off Center Media, a production company that creates documentaries exposing racism and other injustices in the criminal justice system. Emily founded Off Center Media in 2000 with her sister Sarah Kunstler, and together they have produced and directed many short documentaries that have contributed to campaigns to stay executions, convince decision makers to reopen cases, and exonerate the wrongfully convicted. Their film, William Kunstler, Disturbing the Universe, Sundance 2009, was shortlisted for Best Documentary Academy Award. In 2021, the sisters co-directed Who We Are, A Chronicle of Racism in America, South by Southwest for 2023, which was acquired by Sony Pictures Classics and was theatrically released in over 250 cities. In 2023, they directed How to Rig an Election, the racist history of the 1876 presidential context. Sam Tilden and Rutherford B. Hayes, I do know a little about that. An animated documentary short narrated by Tom Hanks that was released nationally by the Washington Post. Emily studied film at NYU, New York University, and for more than 20 years has been committed to making films about the criminal legal system. You can learn more at off-center.com. Emily Kunstler, welcome to the Project Censored Show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Last but not least, Kelley Lane, who has a BA at the University of North Carolina, Asheville in Communications from 2003. After raising a family, Lane returned to journalism and political activism in 2017, interviewing grassroots congressional candidates for two organizations. They then joined Live on the Fly, Assange Countdown to Freedom about Julian Assange in 2020. In 2024, Kelley co-hosted and produced Candidates for Assange with anti-war veteran Matthew Ho, and you can learn more at candidatesforassange.org. Emily is currently working on a project for the 55th anniversary of the Kent State Massacre, which was followed 11 days later by the lesser-known Jackson State Massacre. In sum, Kelley is a muckraking journalist with just enough video editing skills to produce content to help raise awareness and or blow the whistle on issues typically hidden from our view. Kelley Lane makes you a perfect guest for this program, the Project Censored Show. Welcome. Uncensor yourself, Kelley. You're on the air.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely a pleasure. Laurel Krause, let's go to you now and tell us about the history of the Kent State Truth Tribunal and what are we doing here today as we're marking the 55th year since the Kent State Massacre of 1970. Laurel Krause.
I'm so delighted to be telling you this story about our developments that we had in the 55th year. We started this Kent State Truth Tribunal on the 40th year, 15 years ago, and held 3 tribunals. we were wanting to hear the stories from the people who were there, who witnessed and were participants of the Kent State Massacre. Some of the people had never shared their story ever, and they got before our cameras. Emily is our filmmaker and film archivist related to the Kent State Truth Tribunal. And like I said, we held 3 tribunals, one in Kent, Ohio, May 1 through 4 in 2010 on the 40th. And then we moved to San Francisco in August of 2010, and we wrapped up with the Kent State Truth Tribunal in New York City in October 2010. We gathered a lot of interviews from original participants, witnesses, but we also got people who were involved in the prelude and aftermath, if they had meaningful stories to share with us. Um, all of our participants answered a series of questions that Emily artfully and skillfully asked. She asked exactly the same questions with the same types of tonality to have everyone go through this process so that they could share their stories. And we kind of put it in the can for the last 15 years. We had it developed a few years ago. We digitized it, and just recently, the Park Center for Independent Media has come forward, and they're asking. They want to create an archive of our tribunals, and we're putting that together right now.
So, Laurel, this is an exciting time historiographically for this kind of research. I know we're going to get into what's happening around the country right now with protests and dissent and the crackdown on civil liberties. And I know for years, you're one of your focal points and something that's very near and dear to you is protecting the rights of protest and dissent, because that's exactly what was happening in May of 1970. The Nixon administration was cracking down on the constitutional rights of people to protest their inhumane and illegal slaughter of in Vietnam, where they killed more than 3 million people. Incredibly important history for the Vietnamese people, as well as people for here to learn important lessons from. And part of these recordings, as my background as an historian and an oral historian as well, my graduate work was on the Kent State Massacre, Healing Old Wounds, Public Memory, Commemoration, and Conflicts over Historical Interpretations. Running from the 70s to the 90s, there's been a concerted effort by the Kent State administration, certainly by the government, to cover up a lot of what happened in that history. And a big mission for the Kent State Truth Tribunal, I know, has been to uncensor, right? And to reverse the cover up and to hear the stories of people and to hear the important memories that, other than people like the great muckraker I.F. Stone, who did a fantastic book that you gifted me, Laurel, that is right behind me, The Killings at Kent State, How Murder Went Unpunished, was published in 1971. So one of the really best accounts was one of the earliest from I.F. Stone. And Emily Kunstler, I wanted to bring you in here as an expert filmmaker, as a documentarian, as someone that is deeply concerned about civil rights, about social justice. Talk a little bit about your connection to this project and how it intersects with your other really important work around these issues.
Sure. I remember my father talking to me about Kent State when I was young. My father was a civil rights attorney, William Kunstler, and he was asked by the students at Kent State to come out and speak to them soon after the massacre. And he ended up representing a lot of the students that were arrested following the massacre or during that period of protest. And he would also go back out on almost every anniversary because those relationships and what happened there at Kent State was so important to him. And protecting the rights of protesters was so important to him. So when Laurel contacted me back, 15 years ago now, I was really excited for the opportunity to participate in this because I know that the struggle for justice around the massacre at Kent State is an ongoing struggle. It's not something that has ever been tied up in a neat bow. And part of that process is getting the truth out there. And also, I know that there's been a lot done on the topic, but we've only heard from certain voices. And it was important to me and Laurel that we hear from a larger group of voices and people who were actually impacted by what happened at Kent State. I mean, the world was impacted by what happened at Kent State, but the people that actually were there on the ground were profoundly impacted and their lives have never been changed. So not only was it important to record their eyewitness testimony, but it was important to give to ask them to speak, to ask them to record their testimony, and to give them the opportunity to represent an event in their lives that was so that defined who they were, going forward. These are people who've never been asked, and to validate their stories and their participation was just as important to us as capturing the truth of what happened at Kent State. So Laurel asked me to come. I was at the point, I was traveling around the country with the film I made about my father, Disturbing the Universe. But I had a colleague in New York with all my equipment, knew where everything was. So she loaded up a van and drove out from New York to Ohio at 8 hours. I don't know how long it is, with all of our equipment. And I met her there off my tour and met Laurel. And we set up a sort of impromptu studio in a space that Laurel was able to find very close to campus, and invited anyone and everyone who wished to participate.
Yeah, that's, again, an incredibly important story. And thank you for your dedication to seeking the truth around these issues. I myself made many a journey from Youngstown State to Kent State in my graduate school years and in the archives and poking around. But it wasn't really until I got to meet Laurel, really through a mutual friend in grad school that I really started my suspicions about what we weren't learning about Kent really came to bear. It really became more and more obvious that my understanding was moving in the accurate direction. But it wasn't very easy to uncover these things. And I think that the tribunal itself is so significant historically and important, Emily, because of what you just said, because of the people who were never asked, the voices that we didn't get to hear, the evidence that the university administration, Governor Rhodes and his followers, and the people succeeding him at the Ohio governorship and the Nixon administration did everything they could, not just to silence people and to silence the truth, but to punish the victims and their families. And Laurel, I know, affected you deeply, and affected many people. And kudos, Emily, to your father for stepping in and representing these people. I'm very, very typical, of course, of him and his career. Kelley Lane, let's bring you into the conversation with your angle. Again, a big part of this is about uncovering truth, looking at how narratives are suppressed and why. And of course, you've done a lot of work, and you're working now with Laurel. You've done a lot of work on the Julian Assange case and WikiLeaks. So, a lot of that was, again, related to the rights to dissent, the rights to protest, the rights of the public to know what the government does to their name. So chime in, Kelley Lane, a bit on your connection to the project.
Exactly. As I listened to all of these great interviews that Emily did 15 years ago, one of the biggest common thread that I hear is that most of the people don't feel like the truth it still hasn't come out about Kent State. And then the other thing I think is really important is, we ask, well, why does this matter? What happened 55 years ago? And it's because tactics and weapons of war were used against people just protesting. And I think we're in a really dangerous time right now where that could happen again. And that was something most of the people so far that I've heard were asked that, could this happen again? And most of them felt like, yes, it could.
Well, we are in perilous times here. I mean, as we're looking around now and we see the many student protests that have been going on around Israel, Gaza. Again, we're looking at the crackdown on the rights to protest, to dissent. And now the current administration, the second Trump administration, is actively trying to punish colleges and universities financially. So they're of course going after students, the most vulnerable among them, right? Students from other countries. And it's absolutely a travesty at what's happening around campuses. And unfortunately, we're seeing institutions of higher education capitulate and cave around issues of academic freedom, around issues of dissent, around what the mission of higher education actually is. And we're seeing a crisis being spurred here in the Trump administration with illegal wars happening around the world, whether it's Russia and Ukraine, or whether it's the United States proxy wars in Yemen through Saudi Arabia, or of course the support of Israel on Gaza. And we're seeing a terrible crackdown on dissent and the rights to protest here, particularly in higher education. There have been record number of protesters here around this past April, early weekend in April, where the corporate media couldn't really be bothered to cover most of what happened. So that tendency of the corporate media to not cover these things, to not tell the people's narrative, to not talk about what's really going on, kind of harkens back to I.F. Stone. Why we need muckraking journalists and independent press to report these things, because the New York Times relegated the big protests to like page 18 in the Metro section. They just don't want to deal with it. And Laurel Krause, again, you have a long history of tilting at the windmill of the corporate media and trying to get your voice and the spirit of Allison out to the public. And that's really what's at the core of the Kent State Truth Tribunal. Can you talk to us a little bit more about some of the things that we're going to see in the Kent State videos and the talks? And again, maybe talk a little bit more about some of the things not only you've uncovered, but the fact that there are still efforts to suppress this history to this very day.
Well, I think I want to just cycle back to one thing that we might have missed saying. In May 1974, students were killed by U.S. bullets shot by the Ohio National Guard on their campus at noon. And then 11 days later, Jackson State, where 2 students were killed. At Kent State, there were 9 wounded, serious wounds. I mean, they're using M1 guns and rifles, and they were like, it was warfare on campus at noon at Kent. And then they went to Jackson State and they shot up a women's dormitory, killing 2 students and wounding 12. The events that when those events happened, there was a silence from the media about what really happened, and then they decided to fill that silence with a pack of lies, as my father would say, Arthur Krause. Our family took up the baton to fight this. We led the fight, and my father took it to the courts. He actually had to take it all the way to the Supreme Court to get the right to sue Ohio. And when that happened 5 years later, it returned to the courts, ending in 1979 with a statement of regret. And my family received $15,000 for the killing of my sister, Allison. Basically, they don't want to pay for what they did. They don't want to account for what they did. They don't want to admit what they did. And they want to write all these false narratives about what they did on May 4 and May 15 in 1970, when they killed protesters against war. And it was very specific about that. It's like it's a third rail. You're not allowed to do that in America. And here we are again. Now, I have written about this. You can go and take a look at Mendo Coast Current. I have an article called Honor Thy Protesters. Back in 2017, when I wrote this, I was very concerned about the protection of protesters. There aren't any rules or laws there to help us be protected when we're dissenting, which is one of the tenets of the United States. Our right to protest is a protected First Amendment right. It's actually, when we learn it in school, we're told that that's what we need to do. We need to go out there and share our positions and protest. But the reality is when we do that and it's against war, and if it's really organized, the forces of our government will come out and silence those people. They think it's their job. I've never understood what happened back in 1970. I never will. I'll never accept what they did. When they do these types of actions, anyone that's involved in wishing to bring the truth forward about what happened becomes a target as well. And that's my life story. 55 years of having a government wanting to silence me for fighting for my sister and for her friends and all the wounded and every protester in America. That's my reality.
Yeah, it is, Laurel. And some people out there may wonder 55 years later, well, what has been uncovered and what stories are being told? And year after year, we learn more and more. And the chapter that you co-authored for Project Censored was on uncovering the Kent State cover-up, right? Where we've learned more information, the forensic analysis from Stuart Allen, the FBI mole, right? That we've learned so much since. This has attracted the attention of many other muckraking folk, from Michael Moore to Ralph Nader. We put on a 50th anniversary special of this. We've been at this a while, none longer than you, of course, Laurel. But I was attracted to this event in for the 25th marker in 1995 when I was presenting my research. I subsequently, of course, came to know you and was fortunate enough to be able to meet you and Emily in New York in 2010 and be part of the Kent State Tribunal when I was there, talking about my second Project Censored book at the time. So it's been a minute. And Emily, I wanted to, of course, bring you back in here to talk a little about some of that. I know you've been very close to these testimonies. Could you maybe talk a little bit, just from your recollection, what are a couple things maybe that really stand out about the power of some of the testimonies, and why do they matter today?
I mean, I think the greatest power is in the testimonies as a group. I mean, we have over 50 hours, I think, of material of individuals who came forward, and it's the combination of what everyone's saying. You don't get the truth from one person. You get little pieces of a puzzle from everybody. And I mean, that's why Laurel and I are so excited about the partnership with the Park Center, that all this material will be in one place and available to researchers and students. So much more work needs to be done on this topic, and to make our materials available to be part of that research is really exciting. It's a dream come true for us. We've had this material for so long, and we just want it to be used for good. So we're so excited. There's so much that you can take. I mean, there's all sorts of different directions that can be taken with this material. There's a lot there, and we're really excited for people to start doing their own investigations using our primary source materials as evidence.
And it's an amazing treasure trove of this kind of information, the kind of information that we certainly didn't hear in many of the works done on Kent State prior to the founding of the tribunal. And I think it's going to encourage people not only to potentially research the history of what's going on and what went on in Vietnam and at Kent State in particular, the war coming home, but again, open up the eyes of young people that see these kinds of injustices happening now around them. It's important that they realize that they're not alone. It's important that they also realize that this isn't the first time, right? There's a history of these kinds of behaviors, of these kinds of activities that have been happening in the United States for a very, very long time. And again, going back to I.F. Stone, connection to the Park Center and the Izzy Award, one of the great quotes from I.F. Stone, of course, is all governments lie, but disaster lies in wait for countries whose officials smoke the same hashish they give out. Meaning, right? There have been lies and cover up around what's been happening at Kent for 55 years. The tribunal really helps, get through that smoke that's being blown in the faces of the public so that we have more clarity. And Kelley Lane, you certainly know about that topic. You know about that issue from your experience. Can you speak to the importance of that?
Absolutely. Another common thread that I'm hearing throughout all of these interviews is that the students that were there noted how different, I mean, completely different their experience was from what they then saw in the media later. And it was like completely fabricated. And I think they all say, I don't trust the government, I don't trust the media, and I go to many sources. And I think that's important now to do that as well.
It's incredibly important to diversify our sources and find this information. But as we've heard earlier too, not only is this information in the tribunal that many people have never heard of, right? It's difficult to find a home for it, which is why we're hopeful that, by academically archiving this under the guise of Stone, under the guise of the importance of truth-telling, independent journalism, which is something that is very near and dear to us also at Project Censored. The public has a right to know. The public has a right to know not only what the government is doing in its name, but also its many proxies, right? And Laurel Krause, and we have a couple minutes left in this segment. I just wanted to go around and just have a few final words for our segment here, and maybe we can share a couple places that people can check in online to see updates on the status of this project. Laurel Krause.
Well, I feel that one of the main factors that created the Kent State Massacre was a group called COINTELPRO. They're very thick in the Kent State history. They were very active at that time with the New Left and chaos programs. And for some reason, Kent State has been left out of that narrative, tagging COINTELPRO with all the work that they've done all these years. I think it's important for people to understand that we have parts of our government that are actually working to do the things that were done to the Kent State students. They're creating events, and then after the events, they write up their stories about those events with counterfactual information completely. And they think that's their job. I've had enough of this. I hope it gets blown wide open. I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you so much, Laurel. Thank you for your ongoing commitment to tell these truths and to get these narratives to the public. Emily Kunstler, your final words for the segment.
I would say there was a reason why the government came down so hard on the students at Kent. And it's because they were frightened. And that's the same reason why there's an effort to silence protesters and protests today. Because the government knows that the only way to fight oppression effectively is resistance. And resistance and continued resistance is the only thing that's changed this world for the better throughout history. So it has real power, and the people in charge know that. So I hope that people who look at these materials draw connections to today and take away from this the importance of still being out there, especially when a lot of people can't be because they're too vulnerable to be out there as a reminder of the continued resistance and strength of resistance, so that we can work to continue Allison's journey of changing the world and making it better.
Absolutely. Thank you, Emily Kunstler. And Kelley Lane.
Yeah, I just want to say I think we are at great risk now with the militarization of the police forces across this country, that, a tragedy like this could happen again. But additionally, I think we're also looking at, as Ellen Dershowitz threatened, we're looking at lawfare being, all these students hit with that as well. So I certainly hope there's not another tragedy like Kent State, but this is like multi-faceted, and we have to sort of hit it from all angles, getting the truth out. And I'm so glad that you guys are doing this at the Park Center, and I'm honored to be a part of it with Laurel and help edit some of these great, wonderful interviews.
Thank you, Kelley Lane. And as you know, the weaponization of government, lawfare, right? These are other tactics that we're seeing right now against protesters, the Kafkaesque disappearance of people, including people that are here in the United States lawfully that should have the same First Amendment rights as everyone else. So it's important to remain vigilant, and history can be a great teacher. It can really help us not only remember the people that we've lost, Allison Krause, Jeffrey Miller, Sandra Scheuer, William Schroeder at Kent State, right? But it also is an important lesson that if we do not remain vigilant, we don't remember these things, we become less aware of them in the present. And unfortunately, they can become dangerously normalized. And I think that one of the main missions for part of the Kent State Truth Tribunal for me is to not let those memories disappear and to make them front and center for people to understand that we all need to be on the front lines fighting for these rights together. So Laurel Krause, Emily Kunstler, Kelley Lane, thank you so much for joining us on the Project Censored Show today for the 55th year since the Kent State Massacre in 1970.
Peace.
Thank you, Mickey.
Yeah.
You can learn more at parkindymedia.org or projectcensored.org.